From the shadow depths, far beneath the Misty Mountains, rose Durin's Bane, the Balrog of Moria, bringing death and destruction to the realm of Khazad-dûm. It forced Durin's folk to flee the ancient halls of their forefathers, driving them into exile for over 1,000 years. But how could a single creature bring such devastation to the mightiest and eldest kingdom of the dwarves? What force, what sorcery could sunder a people who were so deeply rooted in their ancient realm of stone? Was it simply the fire and brute strength of the Balrog, or was there some other devilry at work? Today we will answer these questions and more as we discover exactly how the Balrog conquered Moria. In the First Age, Middle-earth was almost unrecognizable, for in these ancient days, Beleriand still stretched toward the western horizon, as yet unclaimed by the sea. At this time, the Blue Mountains were home to the proud dwarven cities of Nogrod and Belegost. Their stone halls were strong, skillfully hewn from the living rock, but even they could not the fury that marked the end of their age. When Morgoth was overthrown and Thangorodrim was broken, the host of the Valar also inadvertently destroyed much of Middle-earth. And as the Blue Mountains were torn asunder, the cities of Nogrod and Belegost were lost. Yet a number of the dwarves who once inhabited the Blue Mountains managed to escape the devastation, and they now sought refuge with their kin. Thus they journeyed eastward, seeking Khazad-dûm, the ancient kingdom of Durin the Deathless. With their coming, Khazad-dûm was enriched. Its wealth grew, its knowledge was deepened, and its craft was refined. And in the Second Age, the dwarves tunneled through to the western side of the Misty Mountains. And once they emerged, the dwarves formed bonds of friendship and trade with the elves of Eregion. These were the most glorious days of Khazad-dûm, but they were not to last. Sauron rose in power, and his black legions descended upon Eregion in search of the rings of power. And once the elven lands were laid to ruin, the gates of Khazad-dûm were closed. The power of Moria endured throughout the Dark Years and the dominion of Sauron. For though Eregion was destroyed and the gates of Moria were shut, the halls of Khazad-dûm were too deep and strong, and filled with a people too numerous and valiant for Sauron to conquer from without. Here, Tolkien informs us that, even with the one ring upon his finger, Sauron would have been unable to assail Durin's folk at this time. Such was the power and glory of their kingdom. And with the West Gate now sealed to those within, it must have seemed that no force could ever hope to reach them in their subterranean realm. But, as we know, there are evils in the world that do not come knocking at the gates. In the beginning, there was Ilúvatar, and from his thought he created the Ainur, and he bestowed upon them the gift of song. And as each of the Ainur started to sing, the great music known as the Ainulindale began. And as the Ainur sang, their melodies wove together in perfect accord. But among their number was Melkor, the mightiest of the Ainur, and he began a melody of his own making. And so his voice rose in discord, challenging the music that surrounded him, and others close to him began to shape their voices to his. And for a time, Melkor's theme had the mastery, but the theme of Ilúvatar could not be subdued, and he sent forth a single resounding chord. It was a sound of such power and finality that it silenced all others, and the music ceased. Now Ilúvatar showed the Ainur a vision. A world took shape before them, and they saw that it was destined to be the dwelling place of men and elves. Ilúvatar told them that this world was born of their music, that every note had been woven into its making. Ilúvatar told Melkor that his dissonance too would only ultimately serve to enhance the glory of the vision, for nothing could exist outside his will. At this, Melkor was consumed by shame and anger. He had desired a creation of his own, a dominion where he would be master and lord, where others would bow to his will and call him king. Yet this was denied to him, for the flame imperishable, the secret of true creation, lay with Ilúvatar alone. Next, Ilúvatar gave form to the vision and made it real, and it was called air. Yet the world was not as in the vision, for it was not yet made, and it was dark and formless. And so it was that some of the most powerful Ainur chose to enter air in order to bring form to the world, which would be called Arda. These great spirits would become known as the Valar, the powers of the world. And they called to their side many of the lesser Ainur, who would come to be known as the Maiar, and would each serve one of the Valar. Together they sought to bring forth the splendor of the vision. Yet among those who had come to Arda was Melkor, and at his side stood the Umayyad, and they would take upon themselves the forms of demons of fire, the Balrogs they would be called, and they were his most terrible and deadly warriors. Fear when thou feelest, and the flames lick thee, and the whips of the Balrogs thy white flesh brand. Yet away canst win, and thou wishest still to lessen thy lot of lingering woe. Balrogs are ancient spirits made flesh, primordial beings clad in a hellish raiment. As Maiar, they are of the same divine order as Gandalf and Sauron, who are also bound in physical form during the years of the War of the Ring. Yet they are naturally formless, and due to this fact, many believe they cannot be slain by conventional means. This belief was etched deeper into the minds of audiences through Gandalf's warning in Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. Upon realizing they are being hunted by a Balrog, Gandalf turns to Aragorn and informs him that swords are no more use here. A chilling proclamation that implies the futility of mortal steel against such an ancient terror. This would of course mean that no dwarf, no matter how brave or battle-hardened, could have ever stood a chance against Durin's Bane in combat. The truth is that although it would of course have been extremely difficult for the dwarves to slay a Balrog, in theory, it was possible. All incarnate beings, no matter how divine their origin, can be slain. Even Sauron had his body destroyed multiple times throughout the ages. Though his spirit endured and took shape anew, he was undeniably slain. And when Gandalf the Grey fought Durin's Bane atop Zaraxigil, although he emerged victorious, he did not survive his wounds. For to be incarnate means to suffer pain, to grow weary, and to die. By incarnate, I mean they were embodied in physical bodies capable of pain and weariness, and of afflicting the spirit with physical fear, and of being killed. Though supported by the angelic spirit, they might endure long and only show slowly the wearing of care and labor. So the Balrog could certainly be vanquished by a powerful enough foe. And the halls of Khazad-dûm were not held by cowards. They were guarded by some of the greatest warriors of Middle-earth. However, I have heard it said that Balrogs have only ever been slain by those wielding blades forged in the hidden city of Gondolin. Glamdring, for example, the ancient sword borne by Gandalf in his fateful clash with Durin's Bane, was crafted in Gondolin. However, while there is a measure of truth in this assertion, it is ultimately not quite accurate. Within the pages of the second volume of the Book of Lost Tales, we learn of how Ecthelion of the Fountain faced Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs. And though it is true that Ecthelion bore a blade wrought in Gondolin's forges, his sword did not claim the glory that day. Then leapt Ecthelion, Lord of the Fountain, fairest of the Noldorli, full at Gothmog, even as he raised his whip, and his helm that had a spike upon it he drave into that evil breast, and he twined his legs about his foeman's thighs. And the Balrog yelled and fell forward. But those two dropped into the basin of the king's fountain, which was very deep. There found that creature his bane, and Ecthelion sank steel-laden into the depths, and so perished the Lord of the Fountain after fiery battle in cool waters. Though this tale belongs to the earliest days of Tolkien's legendarium, it illustrates that Tolkien did not, at that time at least, intend for us to believe that Balrogs could only be slain by specially forged blades. Besides, dwarven weaponry was anything but ordinary. The smiths of Khazad-dûm possessed legendary skill. Their weapons and armor were marvels of craftsmanship, the finest of which were wrought from mithril. And Durin VI himself was quite extraordinary. He was believed to be the sixth incarnation of Durin the Deathless, the ancient father of the Longbeards and the first of the Dwarven fathers to ever walk the earth. In addition to this, he bore Durin's axe, a relic of exceptional importance that had passed to him through the ages of Middle-earth, and a weapon of legend worthy of any foe. After all, there is a good reason why the Balrog slipped quietly down into the shadows, withdrawing from the world above. It did so because it was vulnerable, it was scared, and it knew the taste of defeat all too well. When Thangorodrim fell and Beleriand was lost beneath the waves, it was not only the dwarves of Nogrod and Belegost who sought refuge beneath the Misty Mountains. In the wake of the cataclysm, a Balrog of Morgoth escaped the wrath of the lords of the west and vanished into the east. There, beneath the Misty Mountains, it slipped into the darkness beneath Khazad-dûm and fell into a long slumber. For more than 5,000 years, Durin's Bane lay hidden in the deep places beneath the mountains, forgotten by all. Through the forging of the Rings of Power, through the War of the Last Alliance, through the drowning of Númenor, and through the Angmar War, the Balrog remained forgotten and undisturbed. But evil does not sleep forever, and in the Third Age, two currents of fate began to swirl simultaneously. To the east, across the river Anduin, the power of Sauron, Morgoth's lieutenant of old, was rising once again. Though known only as the Necromancer, his shadow was felt far and wide. All dark things began to stir beneath his rising influence, and the Balrog too was stirring. This coincided with the mining efforts of the dwarves, who at that time delved ever deeper, driven by their quest for mithril. The dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Barazinbar for mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that flying from Thangorodrim had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth. In the year 1980 of the Third Age, the mithril miners of King Durin VI disturbed the ancient terror that dwelled in the black heart of the world, and from the depths it rose with a rage that had simmered in silence for 5 millennia, and it slew Durin, thus earning the name Durin's Bane. Yet the Balrog did not immediately attack Khazad-dûm. In fact, the dwarves would not have their final confrontation with Durin's Bane until the following year, when it would rise anew to darken the light of their great halls once and for all. Our understanding of the Balrog's abilities is drawn in large part from the chapter in which the Fellowship encounters Durin's Bane in Moria. Here we learn that there is more to the Balrog than its fearsome appearance suggests. It soon becomes apparent that Durin's Bane is a being of terrible intellect, capable of weaving dark spells and countering the magic of Gandalf with chilling ferocity. When Gandalf attempts to hold the door at the Chamber of Mazabul, he calls upon his magical abilities to slow the orcs' advance. I felt it through the door, and the orcs themselves were afraid and fell silent. It laid hold of the iron ring, and then it perceived me and my spell. What it was I cannot guess, but I have never felt such a challenge. It nearly broke me. For an instant, the door left my control and began to open. I had to speak a word of command. That proved too great a strain. The door burst in pieces. The Balrog's counterspell is so overwhelming that it eclipses the enchantment that Gandalf had placed upon the door, and the force unleashed when the two spells clash is such that it nearly broke the unsuspecting wizard. And in a fortunate twist of fate, the power of the Balrog's spell causes the passage to collapse, and pursuit is denied. The door burst in pieces. Something dark as a cloud was blocking out all light inside, and I was thrown backwards, down the stairs. All the wall gave way, and the roof of the chamber as well, I think. As the Fellowship continue on towards the bridge of Khazad-dûm, they find that the power of the Balrog is such that it has rent the earth, transforming Khazad-dûm into something akin to a hellish nightmare. They peered out. Before them was another cavernous hall. Westward it ran away into darkness. Down the center stalked a double line of towering pillars. They were carved like boles of mighty trees, whose boughs upheld the roof with a branching tracery of stone. Their stems were smooth and black, but a red glow was darkly mirrored in their sides. Right across the floor, close to the feet of two huge pillars, a great fissure had opened. Out of it a fierce red light came, and now and again flames licked at the brink and curled about the bases of the columns. Wisps of dark smoke wavered in the hot air. The Balrog's power was immense, a force so fierce it could tear open the living rock. And with a will steeped in ancient power, it summoned fire from the deep, creating blazing fissures in the stone. And when Gandalf told of his climactic clash with the Balrog, high upon the frozen peak of the Silvertine, he described the elemental fury that was unleashed as the two celestial powers collided. Those that looked up from afar thought that the mountain was crowned with storm. Thunder they heard, and lightning, they said, smoked upon Celebdil and leapt back broken in tons of fire. A great smoke rose about us, vapor and steam. Ice fell like rain. The Balrog's formidable sorcery surely played no small part in the fall of Khazad-dûm. But there remains one force we have not yet named, the power of fear itself. Of the many dread powers wielded by the servants of darkness, few are as harrowing as their ability to pour forth an unseen, suffocating aura, a miasma of fear so profound that it renders their adversaries defenseless. And in Utumno he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame, Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days. It is all too easy to overlook this ability, reducing it to nothing more than a natural consequence of encountering an enemy whose very presence demands terror. Yet the fear that radiates from such beings is far more than a mere side effect. It is a potent and deliberate force, one that plays a key role in some of the most dramatic confrontations in Tolkien's works. Tolkien masterfully explores this concept, carefully describing the profound impact this fear has on those who are exposed to it. Take, for instance, the moment when the Balrog draws near as the Fellowship approach the bridge of Khazad-dûm. Legolas turned and set an arrow to the string, though it was a long shot for his small bow. He drew, but his hand fell, and the arrow slipped to the ground. He gave a cry of dismay and fear. Two great trolls appeared. They bore great slabs of stone and flung them down to serve as gangways over the fire. But it was not the trolls that had filled the elf with terror. The ranks of the orcs had opened, and they crowded away as if they themselves were afraid. Something was coming up behind them. What it was could not be seen. It was like a great shadow, in the middle of which was a dark form, of man shape maybe, yet greater, and a power and terror seemed to be in it, and to go before it. In this scene, Tolkien paints a haunting picture of the Balrog's overwhelming presence, a darkness so profound that it consumed Legolas. The fear it instilled in him was paralyzing, a cold, suffocating dread that gripped him utterly. Tolkien then tells us of the Balrog itself, speaking not only of the beast's physical form, but of the very terror that preceded it. It came to the edge of the fire, and the light faded as if a cloud had bent over it. Then, with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade, like a stabbing tongue of fire. In its left, it held a whip of many thongs. "Aye," wailed Legolas. A Balrog is come." Gimli stared with wide eyes. "Durin's Bane," he cried, and letting his axe fall, he covered his face. Even the stout-hearted Gimli could not stand before the terrible approach of Durin's Bane. And in Lothlorien, the mere remembrance of the Balrog pains him. It is clear, as he speaks the name of the shadow that still haunts his thoughts, that the encounter will linger long in his memory. Indeed, I saw upon the bridge that haunts our darkest dreams, I saw Durin's Bane, said Gimli in a low voice, and dread was in his eyes. This type of fear-inducing presence is of course not unique to the Balrogs alone. The character most commonly associated with this ability is the Witch King. Tolkien's description of his arrival at the gates of Minas Tirith serves as a haunting testament to the terrifying power of fear, capable of shattering the courage of even the bravest of mortal souls. But about the gate, resistance still was stout. And there the knights of Dol Amroth and the hardiest of the garrison stood at bay. Over the hills of slain, a hideous shape appeared, a horseman tall, hooded, cloaked in black. Slowly, trampling the fallen, he rode forth, heeding no longer any dart. He halted and held up a long, pale sword. And as he did so, a great fear fell on all, defender and foe alike, and the hands of men drooped to their sides, and no bow sang. Of course, some may argue that the Witch King, being a wraith, would cast a far more potent spiritual aura than a fire demon. And yet, there is a moment in the Fellowship of the Ring that draws an unexpected parallel between the Witch King and the Balrog. While this scene did not make it into Peter Jackson's films, in the book, as the Fellowship make their way down the River Anduin, they encounter the Witch King mounted upon his fell beast. In this chilling scene, Legolas brings down the winged steed of the Witch King with a single arrow, a feat made possible by the gift of a Galadrim bow, which was presented to him by Lady Galadriel upon their departure from Lothlorien. As Gimli acknowledges Legolas's skill, he comments on the similar feel of both the Witch King and the Balrog, drawing a distinct comparison between the two servants of darkness. "Praised be the bow of Galadriel and the hand and eye of Legolas," said Gimli as he munched a wafer of lembas. "That was a mighty shot in the dark, my friend." "But who can say what it hit?" said Legolas. "I cannot," said Gimli. "But I am glad that the shadow came no nearer. I liked it not at all. Too much it reminded me of the shadow in Moria, the shadow of the Balrog." He ended in a whisper. In this passage, it becomes clear that the aura surrounding the Balrog and the Witch King shared a striking similarity. It therefore seems as though the Balrog would have exuded an aura akin to that of the Witch King. This notion gains even more weight when we turn to the appendices, where Tolkien tells the tale of the Battle of Azanul-Bizar. In this brutal clash, the combined forces of the dwarves attack Azog and the orcs of Moria. Up the steps after him leapt a dwarf with a red axe. It was Dane Ironfoot, Nain's son. Right before the doors he caught Azog, and there he slew him and hewed off his head. That was held a great feat, for Dain was then only a stripling in the reckoning of the dwarves, but long life and many battles lay before him. Until old but unbowed, he fell at last in the War of the Ring. Yet hardy and full of wrath as he was, it is said that when he came down from the gate, he looked grey in the face, as one who has felt great fear. Dain Ironfoot, one of the most courageous and noble of all dwarves, had just felled Azog in battle. Yet a pallor washed over his face, for he had peered through the east gate of Moria, and in the shadows beyond he had glimpsed Durin's Bane. And though a mighty dwarven army stood victorious at the gates of Moria, none dared step forward into the darkness. They understood that some other power must first pass through Moria before they could return to the glorious halls of their fathers. It becomes clear then that the true power of the Balrog lay not just in its strength and in its fire, but in the fear and despair that it could instill in the hearts of even the bravest of warriors. With this in mind, we can now piece together the parts of the story and unravel the fall of Khazad-dûm. When the Balrog first made itself known, one of its first acts was to claim the life of King Durin VI. And as we have established, the presence of the Balrog invoked a feeling of dread in those nearby, meaning that it would be impractical for Durin's Bane to attempt an ambush, and it is unlikely that the king would have accompanied his mithril miners on their expeditions. And even if he did, it seems highly unlikely that he would have just happened to be present when the Balrog first emerged. The most plausible explanation is that Durin, upon learning that a nameless creature had attacked his miners, chose to lead his finest warriors into battle against this mysterious evil. For they did not yet know their peril, and the king would not have let an enemy go unchallenged in the heart of his realm. The company of dwarves who faced the Balrog would have been the kingdom's finest, clad in mithril, their hearts brimming with courage, ready to face whatever darkness awaited them. However, despite their courage and resolve, the Balrog proved to be a foe far darker and more fearsome than the dwarves could have ever imagined. And the Balrog was cunning. It would not have chosen to face the warriors of Durin in one of their larger halls. Instead, it would have awaited them in the labyrinthine depths of Moria, where the winding corridors and narrow passages twisted through the earth. Here, the terrain would have greatly favored the Balrog. The dwarves, though numerous, would have been rendered ineffective, for only a few would have been able to stand against the Balrog at any given time, meaning that their superior numbers would have counted for little. However these events unfolded, the Balrog ultimately claimed the life of Durin, and the rule of Khazad-dûm passed to the king's son, Ninethrifer, and he took up the mantle of leadership with unwavering resolve, as yet unwilling to abandon his kingdom. Though Tolkien did not tell us exactly how long the dwarves endured under Nain's leadership, we know that they held their ground until sometime the following year. During this period, the perilous predicament that the dwarves found themselves in, combined with the aura of fear of the Balrog, would have gnawed at them from within. Yet still they lingered on, sharing their home with an ancient evil that was able to shatter the very stone of their great halls at will. And we hear firsthand of the devastation wrought on the passages, even in the western regions of the mines, whilst the Fellowship passed through the long-abandoned realm. There were fissures and chasms in the walls and floor, and every now and then a crack would open right before their feet. The widest was more than 7 feet across, and it was long before Pippin could summon enough courage to leap over the dreadful gap. The noise of churning water came up from far below, as if some great mill wheel was turning in the depths. Rolp muttered,